Even though modernism is traditionally a post-World War I narrative technique, in the last few years we've seen a pretty significant amount of similarity between some of Woolf's work and today's internet content. That is because modernism is a coping mechanism, first and foremost. It is how people dealt with the aftermath of World War I, the mass death and horror that came from that, and then the rise of fascism, which we are now seeing right now in our own backyards. What we're living in right now are pretty traumatic times, and it only makes sense that we try to return to a time that looked a lot like this. As Natania Rosenfeld comments, history was repeating itself, and repetition in history and language became a theme in both Woolf's writings in the late 1930s. Living now in the 21st century, the internet and social media have made everyone a publisher, or at least made it possible for everyone with access to computing technologies to make public a wide variety of content on various networked platforms. The internet extends our senses, allowing us to see, listen, and reach well beyond our local sensory limits. Having a sense of presence without actually being there is a hallmark of internet-mediated communication. Presence becomes a more complicated concept because it is determined by participation rather than proximity, as is discussed in an article called Is Twitter a Stage?, which I will leave the full details for down below, and as I will with all the other articles that I've covered. This influx of capacity to create as well as ease of access has made media a part of our daily lives more than ever before. Especially Twitter, because Twitter is the most Virginia Woolf form of social media, especially due to its ability to serve as a platform not only for social justice, but because of how it is structured. Mark on the Wall reads just like a Twitter feed. It jumps from topic to topic. You read it as a stream of consciousness. It's serious and happy in the same breath. Woolf also perfectly encapsulates what it's like to live in a world constantly overwhelmed by stimuli, by news, good and bad. In Mark on the Wall, she says, "How readily our thoughts swarm upon a new object, lifting it a little way, as ants carry a blade of straw so feverishly, and then leave it. Why, if one wants to compare life to anything, one must liken it to being blown through the tube at 50 miles an hour, landing at the other end without a single hairpin in one's hair, shut out at the feet of God entirely naked. Yes, that seems to express the rapidity of life, the perpetual waste and repair, also casual, also haphazard," on page 78. She discusses the idea of interrupting a fancy as a relief, much like a joke is a nice break from the devastation on our timelines. She says, "I understand nature's game, her prompting to take action as a way of ending any thought that threatens to excite or to pain. Hence, I suppose, comes our slight contempt for men of action. Men, we assume, who don't think. Still, there's no harm in putting a full stop to one's disagreeable thoughts by looking at a mark on the wall." Woolf tells us that sometimes distraction can be a survival technique, and that there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you can't sit in the sadness or it'll eat you alive. Sometimes you can watch a cat video or two and just get away from the world, but I think Virginia would agree with this, you can't do that forever. Twitter is not all memes and facts that aren't fake news, it's also a fertile ground for white supremacy. As put so eloquently by Erin Carlston, Woolf recognizes that the mass media are cultural forms. She does not disdain them, but instead asks why fascist patriarchy has monopolized the mass media and how they may be recuperated by political progressives. Woolf recognized the pattern of fascism in the 1930s. The adulteration of white supremacist and fascist messaging into our media is a sign of things that are not only coming but have arrived. We should heed her call to reclaim media from groups who use such platforms to spread words of hate and violence. As is shown by Clarissa Dalloway, a shallow person with surprising depth as a character, your class and privilege can give you what seems like permission to tune out from the injustice happening right outside your window. We, as a society, have a habit of making the responsibility of reform rest on those who are suffering from the system we expect them to fix. Movements online like the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement show how we expect the victims of systemic injustice to fix the system itself. In 3 Guineas, Woolf says, "For what other object did your sisters go without teaching or travel or luxuries themselves, except that with the money so saved, their brothers should go to schools and universities and there learn to protect culture and intellectual liberty? But now, since you proclaim them in danger and ask us to add our voice to yours and our 6 pence to your guineas, we must assume that the money so spent was wasted and that those societies have failed." The groups that are suffering the most from the rise of fascism that we see now: people of color, women, the LGBTQ community, people who are disabled, people who are poor, they are not the ones who should be saddled with the sole job of saving our society. That rests on all of us. In 3 Guineas, Virginia quotes something in French. Sous la culture de s'intéresser pour garder le monde de la servante. This translates directly to only selfless culture can keep the world from ruin. What we need right now, more than anything, is some selfless culture, because the world is a little ruined right now, but we can stop it from being totally ruined.